Will Levis is currently the third best quarterback in the division, but with a strong 2024, he can climb up that list. I'm ranking position groups in the AFC South on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's show, we are ranking the offensive position groups in the AFC South. I'm going to tell you why I think Will Levis is the third best quarterback in the division, but he can get higher. Also, the Titans' skill position groups are simply elite within the division. And then finally, I think the Titans' offensive line is stronger than we realize. Before I get into all of that, I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. Speaking of every day, shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. If you aren't an everydayer, you need to be one. And it is AFC South week here on the Locked On Titans podcast. We're going to rank offensive positions today. We're going to rank defensive positions tomorrow, where I expect the cornerbacks will be very, very high. Also, we're going to do a deep dive on all of the Titans' divisional rivals throughout the week. We'll start with the Texans, head to the Colts, finish with the Jaguars. So a great week in store. Again, make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But with that being said, we got to start with quarterback. And as I started the show with, I have Will Levis currently as the third best quarterback in the AFC South. And of course, follow along with me down below. Let me know where you think the Tennessee Titans rank within the division. If you're not watching on YouTube, then hit me up on Twitter at TicTacTitans. Let me know your thoughts there. But Levis at third. First, I have CJ Stroud. I think it's pretty clear and it's pretty obvious that he's the best quarterback in the division. And then I have Trevor Lawrence. And look, Trevor Lawrence has been a disappointment, quite honestly, from what you would expect from a number one overall pick. I don't think that if any Jacksonville Jaguars fan was being honest, they could say that Trevor Lawrence has lived up to the expectation that they had of him. He's been mid at the end of the day. He's been middling amongst the NFL. You look at some of his raw stats, his touchdowns, completions, passing yards, interceptions, all that stuff. He's really on par with the last two Jacksonville Jaguars quarterbacks, and a guy like Gardner Minshew and a guy like Blake Bortles. Like, he has not statistically stepped into that elite range, and he shows flashes of talent. Absolutely, Trevor Lawrence does. If you can't admit that, then you're not being honest. He has shown flashes of high-level play, but he's just been so inconsistent. So inconsistent. And we saw it as Tennessee Titans fans in that Week 18 game at the end of the year against Jacksonville, where the Tennessee Titans won and knocked Jacksonville out. Trevor Lawrence threw some terrible passes in that game, was completely inaccurate. And on the interception that basically ended the game, he was way off. Now, Jacksonville fans will blame the wide receivers and everybody but Trevor Lawrence. And look, Trevor Lawrence got his money. I don't think that he's worth the money that he got paid, but Jacksonville really had no choice. You can't let Trevor Lawrence go to free agency and let him walk and try to start over at this point where they are. They simply can't do that. But for my money, I have Trevor Lawrence at second right now, simply because we only saw 9 games of Will Levis. But I absolutely think that Will Levis can jump over Trevor Lawrence in 2024. If Will Levis has a good season, which we should expect. I mean, think about it. Going from DeAndre Hopkins, Nick Westbrook-Akine, Treylon Burks, Kyle Phillips to Hopkins, Calvin Ridley stealing Trevor Lawrence's number one wide receiver. Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. I mean, those sorts of improvements, along with Brian Callahan leading the offense, the improvements on the offensive line, the running backs as well. Like, there is no reason that Will Levis can't have a fantastic season. And quite honestly, I think the Tennessee Titans could be better than the Jacksonville Jaguars anyways. And a lot of that would have to do with Will Levis performing at least at the level of Trevor Lawrence or better than Trevor Lawrence. Again, I think Trevor Lawrence is an okay quarterback, but he's not a $275 million quarterback, top 10 in the NFL, like some people like to pretend. He's simply not that. He's not. Stroud in his own, he's in his own world above everybody else, in my opinion. I think he's probably a top 10 quarterback in the NFL already going forward. And at the end of the day, I was really high on CJ Stroud. If you listen to me during my draft previews last year, all the draft content that we had in 2023, I wanted the Titans go get CJ Stroud. I loved CJ Stroud as a quarterback. Yes, I'm an Ohio State fan, and everybody said that I was biased there, but it looks like I wasn't, and that CJ Stroud is just that dang good. All right, so I'm putting CJ Stroud in his own world. I even think that if Levis has a fantastic season, he still couldn't pass up CJ Stroud. I mean, I just don't think that that's happening. I think CJ Stroud is that good of a quarterback. But here's what I will say. If we have conversations this time next year and we're talking about Will Levis and CJ Stroud as who's better, and that's a real conversation, then my Lord, Titans fans, buckle your seatbelts. Things could get crazy. But yeah, I will have Trevor Lawrence over Will Levis right now. We've seen much more Trevor Lawrence. He's played in much bigger games. He's played full seasons, all of that. But I think Will Levis can be better. Now, with Anthony Richardson, Colts fans will tear their hair out thinking that Will Levis is better because they completely passed on Will Levis for Anthony Richardson. That was a decision that their team made. And there were rumors that the Colts wanted Will Levis and we're going to pick Will Levis. And there were Colts fans out there that preferred Will Levis over Anthony Richardson. So if Will Levis is better than Anthony Richardson, that hurts Colts fans. So they don't want to admit that. They don't want to accept that. They don't want to even acknowledge that. They're going to laugh that off because Colts fans could not accept Will Levis being better than Anthony Richardson. But how in any realm can you put Anthony Richardson over Will Levis right now based on their rookie seasons? Like, any person putting Anthony Richardson over Will Levis is simply doing it as a projection of what they thought Anthony Richardson could be all along. That's the thing. Anthony Richardson is a tantalizing player for the fantasy community, for the conversation community, because Anthony Richardson does well in fantasy football because of all the rushing. He makes flashy plays with his legs, and then he's got a big arm. He does. So when he makes good throws, it really stands out. And a lot of these draft people and people who cover the NFL, they liked Anthony Richardson a ton coming out of college and were willing to bet on the potential. So, of course, after he does exactly what people who didn't like Anthony Richardson expected, inconsistent with his ball placement, gets hurt because he runs so much. And it's not like Harold Landry tackled Anthony Richardson some crazy hard hit. It was just a regular tackle, but he landed on a shoulder that he's had a ton of problems with. And to me, all of the fluff coming for the Indianapolis Colts and especially Anthony Richardson, it's just a continued pattern of people giving the Colts way too much rope, whether it be them as a team or whether it be Anthony Richardson, their quarterback situation. I mean, they could have a bum out at quarterback and the media is going to hype the Colts up. Like, it's just what it is. You know what I mean? So to me, Anthony Richardson, while he could be a good player, he is more a product of hype from the fantasy community and for people who liked Anthony Richardson before the draft. What he did in his rookie year is nowhere near good enough to say he's a better football player than Will Levis right now. It's just purely projection. So I have Anthony Richardson at number 4 below Will Levis. Again, Levis at 3rd, but I think he could climb to 2nd by the end of the year. With that being said, let's talk about the skill positions because the Titans are dominating right there. Before we do, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Look, I love sports. You guys know that. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down here, we got the end of the Stanley Cup on Monday night. Basketball just finished. We're going to get fewer games. Luckily, the Olympics is this summer. But the sports aren't sporting like we want them to. Here's the thing, though. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Right now, Edmonton is minus 105 on the money line to come back from down 3-0. Let's hope so. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Titans fans, let's continue today's offensive position rankings in the AFC South. Again, it's AFC South week here on the Locked On Titans podcast. I'm doing the offensive position rankings today, doing the defensive position rankings tomorrow. Then I'm going to have a deep dive into the Houston Texans, then a deep dive into the Indianapolis Colts, and then a finish off with a deep dive into Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to look at their moves so far this all season, what they've done. We're going to talk to the host of each of those Locked On shows to get an on-the-ground level explanation of their all season so far. So excited for that. Make sure that you guys don't miss that. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. But I rank Will Levis third out of quarterbacks in the division. Now, we got to look at running back. All right. And in my opinion, the Tennessee Titans are first at running back. And look, here's the way I'm thinking about this. In the NFL nowadays, you need two running backs. You got to have two. That's all that it comes down to. You have to have two good running backs in today's NFL. That's the reality. And out of the teams in their top two running backs, who is better than the Titans? Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard are, I would say, second and third. If you ranked all of the top 8, top 10 running backs in the division, I would say the Titans have 2 and 3. The only person I would put over them is Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is number 1, but 2 and 3 are Spears and Pollard. I would go Spears at 2, and then Pollard at 3, and then Joe Mixon at 4. That's what I would do. That's how I would rank these running backs if we just did, a top to bottom. So the Titans having 2 and 3, that absolutely puts them at number 1. Look, at number 2, I would have Houston with Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. I like Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce is more of a gap running back. We know that that you're going to see a ton of zone from Bobby Slowick. So Dameon Pierce doesn't fit as good in that Houston Texans offense as he did as a rookie. But Dameon Pierce is still a very good player. So I would go Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce at number 2. Jonathan Taylor and who's their number 2? Like, Jonathan Taylor is a great player. But Trey Sermon, Evan Hall, Tyler Goodson. They had Zach Moss last year, and that was a combo. I wanted the Titans to pick up Zach Moss to go with Tajay Spears. I thought that would have been a good signing. The Bengals pick him up so that he could be their starting running back, of course, with Chase Brown as a combo, of course, because you need 2. That's the whole point. But, I mean, I can't put Jonathan Taylor and Trey Sermon, who started with the 49ers, went to the Eagles, can barely stay on a roster, and he's supposed to be QB or RB2. And if he's not RB2, then it's Evan Hall. Evan Hall is a solid do-it-all player, you know what I mean? A good all-around depth player. But as your number 2 running back, no way I'm putting him over Pollard or Pierce. You know what I mean? So then you go Jacksonville. I got Jacksonville last. Jonathan Taylor is a better player than Travis Etienne. And then you have Travis Etienne, who's an okay running back, good running back. But then Dearness Johnson, Tank Bigsby. Bigsby hasn't lived up to anything. Dearness Johnson is a good player, but couldn't even make the roster in Cleveland half the time. I think it's pretty clear that the Titans have the number 1 running back group in the division. I don't think that's much of an argument, quite honestly. So I like what Houston has, but Joe Mixon's so overrated. Everybody acts like that was such an incredible signing. He's just an average running back. You could replace him with a bunch of different people and get similar results. So I got the Titans number 1 at running back. Then we go to wide receiver. And look, I don't have the Titans number 1 here, but I do have the Titans number 2. At the end of the day, Nico Collins, I think, is the best wide receiver in the division. Stephon Diggs, I think you could argue is second or third. And then Tank Dell, while being hurt, and that's something that you got to worry about him being injury prone, had a very, very good year. Okay, very good year. So those 3 are the top in the division, in my opinion. The Titans are right there, though, right there. And then Noah Brown at number 4. I really like Noah Brown. I'm a Noah Brown stan. Okay. I think he's an underrated player. And John Mechie, I know he had dealt with the cancer and then came back and probably took him a little bit to get on track, but that's a solid 5. That's a very good 5. I mean, Noah Brown could be a wide receiver 3 on a lot of teams. All right. And then, of course, you have the Titans with DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. Look, if you want to look at Hop, I said that Calvin Ridley needs to be the Titans' number 1 wide receiver in terms of production. But if you're looking at like X wide receiver versus X wide receiver, Nico Collins 1. I think DeAndre Hopkins is still better than Michael Pittman. So, I mean, you could be mad at me about that if you want, but I'm taking DeAndre Hopkins over Michael Pittman. To me, that's not really much of a question. So, out of just the top 4 number 1 wide receivers, X wide receivers, Titans have number 2, and then Pittman 3, Gabe Davis 4. And then out of the number 2 wide receivers, I think the Titans have the number 1. You have Stephon Diggs, of course, but I think the Diggs that we saw at the end of last season is more of what we're going to see this year. Calvin Ridley's going to be better than Stephon Diggs this year. That's my opinion. So I have Calvin Ridley as the number 1, 2 wide receiver with Diggs at 2, A.D. Mitchell at 3, and then Brian Thomas Jr. at 4. I think Adonai Mitchell is going to be so good. Like, I just think we're going to look back at that and be like, the Titans drafted Tavondre Sweat instead of the Colts' number 1 wide receiver. Like, I think that's going to be one that hurts when we look back in 2 years. But anyways, moving on. And then you look at the number 3 wide receivers. I would probably go Christian Kirk, number 1, Tank Dell, number 2, Tyler Boyd, number 3, Josh Downs, number 4. So even if you want to go through and rank like each of the top 3 wide receivers individually amongst like, here are the slot guys, here are the Z's, here are the X. The Titans have the best Z receiver, the second best X, and the third best slot. Combine that all together. I mean, I have the Texans with 1, 2, and 2. So, of course, that's higher. I mean, the Texans did a good job adding Diggs to their receiver core. That's a great job. No doubt about it. But Hopkins, Ridley, and Boyd is absolutely fantastic. So I'm giving the Titans 2nd there. So 3rd at quarterback, 1st at running back, 2nd at wide receiver. We're going to talk about tight end. We're going to talk about the offensive line as well, where I think I have the Titans ranked a little bit higher than, well, maybe not. Maybe not a little bit higher. It's probably where you're expecting, but I really do think that the Titans will be higher by midseason. By midseason, if we did these rankings again, I think the Titans will be higher in one of these spots. So I'll go over that. Before I do that, Titans fans, let's cap off the offensive AFC South position rankings. We've done quarterback, we've done running back, we've done wide receiver. Now we need to do tight end and the offensive line. Before I get into it, I do want to thank you again for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Also want to remind you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is what it's called. Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On. Plus, you get coverage of every league from our national shows. Stop watching ESPN and Fox Sports and turn on Locked On Sports Today 24/7. Now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app. But Will Levis 3rd, running backs 1st, wide receivers 2nd. We'll start with tight end. And I have the Tennessee Titans 3rd in the tight end rankings here. Obviously, at number 1, I have Evan Ingram from Jacksonville. Ingram's a fantastic player, nearly 1,000-yard pass catcher every year. The guy is just fantastic. He's got his downfalls. He's not much of a blocker. You know, maybe you could question whether he's just a big wide receiver. I get all that. Either way, he's a fantastic weapon, and that's my number 1 tight end in the division. Number 2, though, I had to go with Dalton Schultz out of Houston. I think if we did like tight end groups, Houston falls behind a little bit. So doesn't Jacksonville. Like if you're looking at the top 3 tight ends, then maybe the Titans would be 2nd or maybe even 1st, quite honestly, if you're just doing a composite ranking. But if you're just looking at the top tight end, which It's probably the fairest way to do it. Evan Ingram, certainly at the top of the list. After that, again, Dalton Schultz. But then third, I do have the Tennessee Titans. I have the Titans above the Colts. I know the Colts fans are very high on their tight ends all the time, but I don't know how you could trust them or count on any of them or say that any of them are as good as Chigakonkwo. I think Josh Wiley is honestly going to end up being better than any of these Colts tight ends. Jelani Woods, Kyler Granson, Mo Alley Cox. I don't really care who you want to pick. I think the Colts have the worst tight end situation in the division. They may have more depth. Like, I think all three of those guys are pretty similar. Jelani Woods missed a lot of time last year, so maybe he rebounds. People are going to be way too high on him going into the season. I can already hear it. Like, they have 3 C's. You know what I mean? Where, like, Jacksonville has, a B plus and then a bunch of nonsense. And Houston has a B and a bunch of nonsense. You know what I mean? So if you look at it from that way, maybe you could argue the Colts from a group perspective. But if you're just looking at the top tight end or the top 2 tight ends, to me, the Colts are the worst. Because Jelani Woods, Kyler Granson, Mo Alley Cox, none of them are better than Chigakonkwo, Dalton Schultz, Evan Ingram. And I don't think that's crazy. So to me, that's how I would rank the tight ends. But I think this year we could see Dalton Schultz maybe take a step back, Chigakonkwo or Josh Wiley really emerge. I think we could have a conversation about that halfway through the year. But finally, we have offensive line. And this one was tough for me. Because I have faith, at least in the left side of the Titans offensive line. I really do, But I had to rank the Titans third out of the offensive line. Maybe they can climb up to second by the end of the year. I think that that's possible. I think if at the end of the year, we could look and say that the Titans have the second best offensive line in the division. I think that's possible. But for right now, I mean, I had to go with third because, of course, you have the Colts. You have Bernard Raymond and Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, Will Freeze, Braden Smith. That's a solid group. You got to be honest with yourself. I think it's a little bit of an overrated group. It's the Colts, of course. They're always overrated. But Braden Smith, good player at right tackle, short arms, made a way. Bernard Raymond really came around last year. Sad to hear that happened for the Colts. But he did have a pretty good season. And of course, Quentin Nelson, Will Freeze was bullying some people last year. So you got to give Indianapolis credit. They have a really good offensive line. They're getting a little bit older in some spots. Quentin Kelly, Ryan Kelly, Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly. But yeah, it's just a good group, really solid group, top to bottom. Then I went with Houston. And Houston isn't as solid of a group from top to bottom as Indy, but Laramie Tunsil. I mean, Laramie Tunsil is a top 3 left tackle in the entire NFL. So, maybe J.C. Latham can get to that level quickly. Maybe. Probably not in his first rookie season, but maybe by year 2. Next year when we do this conversation, hopefully Latham is considered somebody ready to take that jump. Definitely 2 years from now. But Tunsil is the best left tackle in the division. So that weighs heavily into the discussion. Kenyon Green has been probably a disappointment so far, injured a lot last year. Can the Texans count on him? Juice Scruggs, second-year player, center out of Penn State. I liked Scruggs as a late-round option in the draft in 2023, but as a starter right away, he's very small. I know that he impressed last year, played above his draft spot, but, I'm not going to – he's probably the 4th best center in the division behind Ryan Kelly. I think, honestly, Cushenberry's the best in the division at center. Mitch Morse for Jacksonville. Shaq Mason is a good right guard. Got him in a trade. And Titus Howard, good right tackle. Didn't work out at left, but is a good right tackle. Then I have the Titans, of course. But finally, I have Jacksonville. And Cam Robinson, he's all right. He's an okay, middle of the way, left tackle. Ezra Cleveland, they picked him up from Minnesota. I'm not a fan. I think Jeffrey Simmons is going to eat him alive, okay? Mitch Morse, good player, got him from Buffalo, but an old player too, 32. Is he going to be able to stay healthy? Brandon Scherf, another guy who is an older player. Is he going to be able to stay healthy? And Anton Harrison, the rookie out of Oklahoma from last year, he was up and down. All right. There's potential there, but he was up and down. Okay. So I got Jacksonville with the worst offensive line in the division. I think that was a problem for them last year, and they made some additions, but like, I just don't know about Mitch Morse, Ezra Cleveland. Are they gonna be able to hold up? That's a big question. So I have the Titans at third on offensive line, but I think that they could even climb above Houston because Houston has some holes. Shaq Mason is basically a journeyman at this point. Juice Scruggs, again, I think is maybe the worst player of, well, NPF, probably the worst player out of any of the starting offensive linemen in the division. It's close there. But yeah, so I think Kenyon Green doesn't live up to the hype again. Juice Scruggs struggles. Shaq Mason, just a jag. I think the Titans could definitely have a better offensive line halfway through the season, But let's have that conversation when it comes around. That's going to do it for the offensive side of the ball. I'm going to be back tomorrow to do defense. Again, then we're going to do a deep dive into the Houston Texans. Then we'll do a deep dive into the Jacksonville Jaguars, or we'll do the Colts, and then we'll finish up with the Jaguars. It's AFC South week here on the Locked On Titans podcast. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. But that's going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.